Welcome to the Anime Audiophile Podcast. Please like and subscribe for more. Thank you. Shikamaru Shinden, a cloud dancing in forlorn falling petals. Chapter 4. It was an incredible sight, the daimyo and their aides from across the entire continent coming together to meet in a single building. They were separated by country at the 10 rows of long semicircular tables arranged in concentric rings. The gazes of some hundreds of people were focused on the podium standing in the center. The Land of Iron had worked at top speed to build this facility. The daimyo had put up a roof over the plaza where he spoke to his citizens and had exactly enough tables and chairs made specifically for this meeting. It was an unprecedented summit. It was beyond anything ever seen before from start to finish. Everyone there was worked up, full of fire before this weaponless battle. The meeting venue, a plaza with nothing more than a roof thrown over it, was exposed to the wind, and despite the cool breeze blowing in from all sides, Shikamaru was sweating. Seated at the tables closest to the podium were the daimyo and aides of the 5 great nations. The 5 kages and faces from the hidden villages were in the row directly behind them. Shikamaru was in the section set aside for the village of Konohagakure near the middle of the long table. Beside Naruto, naturally. "We finally made it," Naruto whispered to him before the meeting. His blue eyes were focused on the empty podium. "Whether we like it or not, this is where it ends." Shikamaru agreed. If more than half of the countries at this summit agree with the Land of Earth, then it's full speed ahead to war. No one's ever had a meeting like this before. If they get approval here, there'll be no stopping the Land of Earth. They'll pull in the countries that agree with them and invade the Land of Flowers. We can't let that happen. Of course not. He put his prayer into words. There was no knowing the results of the meeting until they saw how it all played out. He couldn't predict how many countries would be accepting of Danjo's greed. The instant the Land of Earth's invasion was approved, they would no longer have the option of a covert attack on Danjo. There were too many countries assembled here to be able to carry out such an operation without suspicion. Not only was the Land of Iron providing security, the 5 kages also shared the responsibility to keep the meeting members safe. If Konoha tried anything funny, they'd be found out right away. "It's starting." A samurai sat down at the table next to the podium, the Land of Iron's general. To keep the meeting running smoothly, it had been decided that the general of the Land of Iron, the host country and a neutral party, would act as chairperson. "We will now convene the Continental Summit." At his word, the meeting began. The chairperson gave a rough summary of the events leading up to the summit, as well as the statements from the discordant parties involved, the Land of Earth and the Land of Fire. The outcome they came to about this matter would change the fate of the continent. The entire audience sat in tense silence as the chairperson spoke. Once the long explanation was finished, one of the central parties, Danjo, was invited to take the podium. As he stood there with a leisurely smile on his face, Danjo raised a hand toward the assembled members and bowed respectfully. He took a short breath, placed both hands on the podium, and began to speak. "There is a kind of human being on this continent known as the ninja," the daimyo began. "Ninja. From the moment they are born, they are destined to fight. They can only find the meaning of their own existence in battle. They study the art of violence from a young age. They are taught by their parents and instructors to deceive others, and only once they become hardened professionals in battle can they be recognized as full-fledged members of their villages. Many of the people born to ninja in these hidden villages do not doubt from the time of their birth that they will walk the path of the ninja. Even now as we sit here like this, new ninja are being born in every one of those villages. They only find the meaning of their existence in battle." Shikamaru couldn't completely deny what Danjo was saying. It was true that somewhere in his heart, he always sought to put himself into the middle of electric battle. That feeling was so deep in his bones, it would have been better to call it an instinct at this point. Most likely, the majority of ninja felt the same as he did. Only by pushing themselves into extreme situations could they cultivate their jutsu and chakra. Although their individual aims might have been different, ninja walked the path of the ninja. And this was definitely not an evenly paved road. That was why ninja naturally acquired the habit of putting themselves into harsh environments. But did that mean in the end that a ninja's only truth lay in fighting? No. Shikamaru had a family he loved. He had comrades to protect. He was here in this place now for their sake. He was sitting there to stop the fight. He couldn't deny what Danjo was saying in his head, but he had no intention of simply sitting quietly and agreeing with him. Oblivious to Shikamaru's thoughts, the massive daimyo of the land of Earth continued. The history of the continent has been writ alongside these warriors. I do not intend to condemn them nor suppress them. On the contrary, I more than anyone affirm them in their existence. Which is why I have chosen this path. Danjo waved a hand high in the air with a theatrical flair. From beside him, Shikamaru heard a sound like something hard being ground to dust. Naruto was gritting his teeth and glaring at Danjo. I do not mean to say this is a matter of survival of the fittest. The land of flowers no doubt also has the weapons to stand up and face us. And there are those who would assist them. We do not devour the weak. We fight on equal footing, country to country. The sweet fantasy of peace robs the ninja of their very reason for being. We and the ninja are in a relationship of coexistence. Accepting them means accepting war. Unless we ensure a place for them, those of us who are not ninja will someday be dragged into their delusions just like we were with the previous Great War. Is it not time at last for the world to channel their instinct to fight in an appropriate fashion in order to prevent massive chaos, as well as to accept open warfare as we did in the past? You gotta be kidding me here, Naruto spat, his voice heavy. He just wants to satisfy his own greed. And then he goes turning that into the meaning of a ninja's existence. Calm down, Shikamaru murmured, touching Naruto's clenched fists. Danjo finished his speech at last and received a smattering of applause, definitely not from the majority of the audience. Next is Lord Ikkyu, Shikamaru said, and Naruto closed his eyes and took a deep breath as he nodded. Ikkyu took the floor. He did not offer an exaggerated greeting like Danjo had. He simply bowed his head matter-of-factly to the people assembled and thanked them for coming. And then he looked around the room and began to speak, a calm look on his face. I would like to ask you. Ikkyu smiled slightly. Can ninja really only thrive in the throes of battle? He glanced at Naruto, then raised and lowered his chin slightly, only enough for Naruto and Shikamaru to notice, before turning back to the other attendees. As I listened to Lord Danjo, I simply couldn't rid myself of this sense of dissonance. Because it sounded to me as though he believes the ninja themselves want to fight. Is that really the case, though, in the end? Ikkyu paused for a moment. I can say with certainty that it is not. Ikkyu's voice was quieter and weaker than Danjo's, which came up from the bottom of his stomach. But the softness of it settled deeply into the entire venue. Right now, all the daimyo of the continent are gathered here, regardless of the size of the nation. Rich or poor, strong or weak. We have come together now as comrades, working on behalf of our respective countries. Fortunately, there was not a single daimyo who refused our call to be here today. This is truly unprecedented. Every daimyo on the continent coming together to discuss a single issue. Perhaps some have considered the idea before, but they thought that such a summit would be impossible to realize and so gave up before they had even started. But today, we have made just such a meeting a reality. Everyone in their room held their breath so as not to miss a single word. Ikkyu's gentle speech had drawn them all in. We could not have managed this historic feat without someone making that first move. In fact, the war we discuss would have already started long ago. A month, no, 10 days. And if everything failed, even a day ago. I know of someone who has bought us this time, someone who has fought desperately right up to the last second to prevent a war however he could. Something warm tightened in Shikamaru's chest. I am indeed the one who advocated for this meeting. But what I did is truly insignificant. My decision to cede the Land of Fire's territory was a product of watching a man who would fight until the bitter end, someone who would never give up even as he was forced to crawl. Compared with this brave soul, I have done nothing. I have never sweated blood to make something happen the way he has. My father was the daimyo of the Land of Fire. I have merely run along the rails laid out for me. I never thought to fight a stronger power or run the opposite direction on those rails. But I feel that, by watching this man fight, I have changed. Now, I would push back against any rapids, no matter how they raged, if it meant that the world would remain at peace. Here, at last, Ikkyu raised a hand. His fingers were pointed at Naruto. The man who changed me is a ninja. A man who rejected the fight, who fought against war harder than anyone I've seen before. A man who struggled valiantly up to the last moment to avoid a fight. A man Lord Danjo said could only live in the midst of a fight. A ninja. A clamor rose up in the venue, and Ikkyu was silent for a moment as he waited for it to calm down. He then slowly opened his mouth once more. Can we truly say that the only way to fight is by carving flesh and breaking bones? The ninja who has changed my life and my heart is a man who has worked to find his way from one harsh environment to another. And yet no matter how difficult a position he found himself in, even if it was a situation in which your average person would simply give up, he never lost faith in his victory and charged ahead full speed. And this is indeed the figure of a fighter. But his fight did not lead him to blood or tears or bodies in the end. It led him to this summit now. The passionate spirit that lives inside of this ninja does not exist solely for the purpose of hurting others. Now that I myself am changed with him by my side, I can say this with utter certainty. A light shone in the eyes of the fire daimyo. It is precisely because the ninja are on the very front lines of war that they desire peace more strongly than any of us. Here, Ikkyu smiled. Rather than me going on at length, there's someone else here who can communicate to you much more clearly what it is I wish to say, so I would like to hand him the baton now. May I do so? Applause erupted from the audience. Naruto! Ikkyu called. Shikamaru's friend stood up beside him, and the applause in the makeshift hall grew even more thunderous. I want you to hear what he has to say. Ikkyu cried, his voice the loudest it had been that day. Naruto looked at Shikamaru. He smiled at his partner. Go on then. Yeah. Naruto stood at the podium vacated by Ikkyu. After watching him go up there, Shikamaru got to his feet. What's the matter, Shikamaru? Mirai asked, a look of surprise on her face when he was about to pass in front of her at the end of the row. The Lord Hokage is about to speak. Cigarette. Going for a smoke. It's no smoking in here, right? At a time like this? Mirai looked at him contemptuously, and Shikamaru turned his back to Naruto at the podium. Ikkyu had said he would fight together with them, and of course he had set Naruto at the podium. Shikamaru also thought Naruto should speak if the meeting came to a tense impasse. He anticipated that Ikkyu would make that happen. In his head, he could clearly see how the game would play out. And Naruto wasn't the sort of man to bungle this. If Naruto spoke, it would all be okay. Shikamaru had an absolute faith in that. The game was over. There was no longer any need for him to be there. Our Hokage is an idiot, but no one can beat him when it comes to heart. Brace yourselves and listen, Shikamaru murmured to the representatives of each country who were focused on the podium and left the venue. His job was done. I wasn't trying to do anything special. Even from outside the venue, Shikamaru could hear Naruto loud and clear. Standing beside the cylindrical ashtray, he let the smoke waft out of his mouth as he strained his ears to catch his friend's speech. He'd never been good at gatherings like this. He had to admit that doing anything in front of a full house was such an unbearable drag, he could hardly stand it. This basic nature of his never changed, no matter how old he got. As the Hokage's advisor, he had set foot in places like this more times than he could count, but deep in his heart, he would always be the boy who thought anything and everything was a drag. Shikamaru could hear that boy cursing about all the annoying things he put them both through. Being bathed in light was the Hokage's job. Like Sasuke, Shikamaru worked as Naruto's shadow. There was no need for him to sit in that meeting hall. We all want a peaceful tomorrow. And lasting peace is just a sequence of those tomorrows, isn't it? Naruto didn't try to sound fancy or put on airs in front of the daimyo. The way you are's good enough, Shikamaru thought. People who spoke in lofty tones and pretended to be something they weren't had no passion. Naruto could just be Naruto, the man who had endless, boundless faith in people. Families sit around the dinner table, kids go to school with smiles. A ninja's no different from anyone else. Mornings like this are happiness to us, too. We know better than anyone how seriously priceless such uneventful days are after fighting in the Fourth Great Ninja War. During the war, it hadn't only been the ninja of the 5 hidden villages who came together under the leadership of the 5th Hokage, but also the ninja from the smaller nations. All of them had been someone's father, someone's mother. They were all parents and children. So many families who were unknown to Shikamaru had been sacrificed in that war. They had people waiting for them to come home. How great had their grief been when no one returned. Now that he was a parent, the full extent of the tragedy the Great War had wrought felt painfully real to him. What would Temari and Shikadai do if they got a notice that he was dead? How would he feel if he found out Shikadai had died in battle? Just the thought of it nauseated him and made his hair stand on end. He couldn't even stand the mere idea of it. To calm himself down, he lit his second cigarette. Naruto's speech continued in the hall behind him. Lord Danjo said that ninja can only validate their existence in battle, but I'm telling you that's not true. It's precisely because we fight that we want peace. Ninja resist and endure. We never stop believing in the light, never stop moving forward, no matter how tough things get for us. Ninja don't fight to find the meaning of our own existence. We fight because we seek the light. We fight for peace. The venue was so quiet, you could hear a pin drop. That hopeless boy, the academy dropout, had really grown up. Deep in his heart, Shikamaru was proud of Naruto. He was glad he was the Hokage of his generation. He looked up at the sky. Snowy white clouds drifted along. Wonder what's happening with the family right now. He very much wanted to see them. 3 years or so earlier, a large building had been constructed at the crossroads of the village of Konohagakure's main streets. Once it was completed, a large video screen had been installed on one wall. Most of the time, it showed advertisements for the latest ninja tools or music videos by Land of Fire singers, but that day was different. Today, it showed the hero of the village. A large crowd had gathered at the crossroads and was looking up at the screen. Shikadai was in their midst, with Chocho standing to his right and Inogen to his left. All three watched the Hokage's speech intently. On the screen, Naruto said, "There is some truth to what Lord Danjo says." The Continental Summit brought together every daimyo on the continent. And before such an impressive gathering of personnel, Naruto stood tall and spoke his mind. Shikadai felt like he belonged to a totally different world. Ninja are a tool of war. That might be the reality we live in. But if that's the case, then we should not have ninja in this world. A clamor rose up at the Continental Summit, which came to them through the screen. "What's the Lord Hokage talking about?" Inogen muttered. When Shikadai turned his eyes that way, Inogen continued in a reproachful tone, still focused on Naruto, "We're ninja, aren't we? And, I mean, the Lord Hokage. He's a ninja. Ninja shouldn't exist? What exactly is he trying to do?" But Shikadai basically got what the Hokage was saying without coming right out and saying it. Isn't that what, like, peace kind of is? You know? Perhaps it didn't quite click for Inogen. He merely raised a skeptical eyebrow. Shikadai himself had only the haziest sense of the idea, though, so he wouldn't be able to offer up a better answer even if he kept on trying to put that vague feeling into better words. "Shut up and watch," he said instead and focused on the screen. You're going to vote today on the Land of Fire's proposition to cede this territory to the Land of Earth. But before you do, I have one more proposal to make, this one from the village of Konohagakure. Naruto paused, the span of a single breath. So, like Chocho said. Shikamaru raised his eyebrows and turned his gaze toward her, wondering what she just had to say right now at such a critical moment. So my dad says it was your dad who said we should have this whole summit thing in the first place, Shikamaru. He started, then braced himself so that his comrades didn't notice his surprise. My dad looked really happy about the whole thing. He said that if it wasn't for your dad, we would have gone to war ages ago. His heart pounded loudly, and goosebumps popped up all over his body. His dad. The man who spent half his time in the house getting yelled at by Shikamaru's mom. Shirt always off, never bothering to take a bath when he came home in the middle of the night. On his rare days off, he'd sit on the veranda and stare vacantly out at the garden. Shikamaru might have been his son, but he couldn't help thinking that his dad was a huge mess. And that guy was working this kind of massive job. He was at a loss for words. The camera cut from Naruto to show the inside of the meeting hall. Shikamaru could clearly make out Mirai and other faces from the village of Konohagakure, but his father wasn't among them. Why wasn't his father there? If what Chocho was saying was true, then there was no way his father wouldn't have been there for the Hokage's speech. And yet, his father had to have been there. He was no doubt watching over Naruto from some corner of the room that wasn't shown on the screen. Chocho's father had probably been telling the truth about this whole thing. You have to be ready to put your life on the line for whatever it is before you can call that thing a drag. You can't use the word as an excuse to run. Once you admit that it's a serious drag, you have to do whatever it takes to overcome that thing. Otherwise, this little verbal tick of ours is just a convenient means of escape. His father had told him this. He had faith now. That's like, Shikamaru's amazing, huh? Inogen said. Shikamaru couldn't answer his friend. He felt like he'd start crying if he said a word. Alone in the family's living room, Temari watched Naruto on the TV screen earnestly reading from an unfamiliar script. We propose to share all intelligence among all the hidden villages and redress differences in individual Bao power. As a first step, Konoha will disclose its own secret intelligence to the other villages. If we can make real progress in sharing information with one another, we can create peaceful uses for ninjutsu. With new uses for ninja techniques, ninja can earn their living without having to go on dangerous missions. Naruto lifted his face from his notes. As Hokage, I want to propose this to all the nations gathered here. Temari listened solemnly, kneeling before the screen in a formal position. They had shown the inside of the hall a moment earlier, and she found her brothers seated at one table, representatives of Sunagakure. They'd almost been smiling at Naruto on the podium, and she breathed a sigh of relief. But a critical member was nowhere to be found. Shikamaru was not sitting with Konoha. My job's done. It's a drag sitting in a room full of people like that. She could almost hear her husband's voice. We absolutely can't go to war. Please, I'm asking you. As representatives of your countries, please make the only rational decision. Naruto bowed so deeply that his head almost rested on the podium. Temari felt something sublime in the figure he cut. It was a grand speech from the Hokage of Konoha, from a single ninja among many. And at work in his shadow was her husband. He did everything he possibly could for Naruto and for the village of Konohagakure. In fact, it was more than that. That husband of hers squeezed out every last ounce of strength he had for the sake of the whole world. Shikamaru desperately hoped for peace. He felt more strongly than anyone else that the time of the ninja was over. A lazy life, lazy days, a lazy death, this was what Shikamaru wanted. Sometimes the thought struck her that maybe she had been the one who had snatched that dream away from him. Had Shikamaru been forced to the front lines of battle because of Temari and Shikamaru, even though he desired nothing other than a life of idleness? Wouldn't he actually prefer to work somewhere more easygoing, a place that didn't cause such waves in his heart? Temari was a ninja. There had been a time when she was hostile to Shikamaru and Naruto and the rest of them. She had lived as a ninja of Sunagakure and married into the village of Konohagakure. She had her own ninja tools and a very clear idea of what exactly a ninja was and should be. Perhaps she had unconsciously sought that in Shikamaru and Shikadai. Her husband was the kindest man she knew. For her sake and the sake of her son, for Naruto, for the village of Konohagakure, he always put himself second. He was too good for her. But in his heart, did he actually want to throw it all away and drift along like a cloud, living however he pleased? She had been too scared to ever ask him. She was grateful to him for working so hard on their behalf, and she had faith in him. No one took greater joy in Shikadai's growth than Shikamaru. After Shikadai's big showing in the Chunin exams, he had come home and gleefully described every minute of it to her. Shikamaru was a good father, which was exactly why, when he was in this house, she wanted him to be his true self. She clenched the hands resting on her knees as she knelt before the TV. Her fingers caught on her thighs, digging into them lightly. Naruto stepped down from the podium. The hall was enveloped in thunderous applause. "You really worked hard, huh, Shikamaru?" Temari said to the empty seat next to Naruto as he sat down. "I'm falling asleep here." The smoking area outside the venue was reserved for Shikamaru's personal party of one. Everyone else was utterly swept up by the summit inside, so naturally, no one was tearing themselves away to come out for a cigarette. Lying on the long bench likely set up there in a hurry before the meeting, he stared absently up at the sky. Inside, the representatives of the many participating nations were giving their speeches. Before the start of the summit, those who wished to speak had indicated that intention so that they could be allocated a certain amount of time, and they now came to the podium in order, one after the other. All of these arrangements had been splendidly executed by the samurai of the Land of Iron. Their experience in handling 5 Kage summits over long years spoke volumes at times like this. And it appeared that any country that applied in advance was being given the opportunity to have their say. The voting probably wouldn't even start until quite late. So boring, how was he going to pass the time until then? Most of the voices that spilled out from the hall to reach his ears were in agreement with the Land of Fire and Naruto. Some countries even severely censured the Land of Earth. What Shikamaru found deeply strange, however, was the fact that one of the countries at the heart of the matter, the Land of Flowers, was not on the list of speakers he'd seen before the meeting started. They were not going to speak at this critical juncture despite the fact that they were the ones facing an invasion at the unilateral decision of a great nation. It had been a while now since he'd left the meeting. During that time, the only people who invaded his private smoking space were a couple of samurai on guard, apparently taking a break. Neither of them spoke to Shikamaru sprawled out on the bench in the corner. A familiar voice drifted out from inside. "I cannot disregard the Hokage's magnanimous concession. Kuratsuchi." Her voice was as cool and collected as it was when speaking with the 5 Kages, despite the much larger platform she had here. The inequality in Bao power caused by Konohagakure's excessive might will most assuredly become the seat of war. To protect my own nation, I resolve to accept the Land of Earth's petition and cooperate in the invasion of the Land of Flowers. However, the Hokage's speech today and the brave decision of the Land of Fire's daimyo, Lord Ikkyu, have caused me to realize that the situation that I feared was an evil vision born of my own weak heart. There was absolutely no outside interference such as Jinjutsu at work when I made my decision. It stemmed entirely from my own weakness. The self-possessed Sachikage looked at even her own self with her sharp, penetrating eyes. She wasn't a stupid ninja. When the situation changed, she was able to pull back on what she had previously asserted in an almost pleasingly refreshing way rather than cling to a foolish agenda for the sake of her ego. I would like to accept the petitions of the Hokage and Lord Ikkyu. If these motions are accepted, then the village of Uegakure will no longer have a reason to fight. Yes. Shikamaru clenched a fist, still lying on his back. If Uegakure pulled out, then the land of Earth would lose the majority of their fighting strength. The 5 great nations had essentially abandoned their own national armies by relying on ninja over soldiers, and they no longer had the power to go to war on their own. Kuratsuchi's declaration told the entire world that a war had just been averted. There was no longer any need for a vote. The fact that Kuratsuchi had been decided their victory. Fuya. He yawned, assaulted by a sudden sleepiness. Tears filled his eyes and spilled out, sliding down past his ears. It was entirely the fault of this yawn. He definitely wasn't so overcome with emotion that he was crying. He wasn't just playing tough here, these were simply tears brought about by yawning. All of this, the meetings, the speeches, the maneuvering, it was absolutely a real fight for Shikamaru. A very difficult fight, in fact, one he couldn't even have begun to tackle under his own power alone. Compared with this epic battle, he'd just been playing house on his previous missions. And this was actually the story of Shikamaru himself. Up until now, the fight had been his and his alone. Although he had worked with his teammates, in the end, he fought directly himself, testing his own abilities. When he was hurt and defeated, he only had his own inexperience to blame. He could have died, and it would have had no effect on the country or public order. No sea of blazing flames would swallow up the continent. But this time was different. Their loss, of course, wouldn't have meant that Shikamaru died right then and there. As a ninja, his abilities were beyond question. But if they'd lost, the situation would have been much more serious than his own death. A defeat would have led directly to war among the nations, and the grave pressure of that fact weighed more heavily on him than any pressure he ever felt before this. We won. And yet, strangely, he felt no sense of accomplishment. This was not his victory, it was the world's victory. They had been led to this fortunate result because the people on this continent desired true peace. Not too shabby. He'd given up his just right life when he decided that he would hold Naruto up. This was Shikamaru's battlefield now. It was a battlefield where he held no sword, where he didn't even use his jutsu. And he himself had chosen to live here, irritated all the while. He had no regrets. But, still, it really is a drag, he muttered and smiled. He didn't feel a sense of accomplishment, but the feeling he did have was all right. The days of quiet tranquility were back. Just the thought of it made his heart grow lighter. He closed his eyes. The darkness behind his eyelids reached out, intent on sucking him in. Which reminded him that he hadn't been sleeping too well lately. He'd been too on edge to sleep. Let me sleep today at least. Maru. A voice. Shikama, who? Shikamaru. The world shook violently, and he rolled off of the bench. He looked up with red eyes to find his friend outlined against the night sky. Naruto, he murmured, dazed, squatting next to the bench. He'd been having a good dream, but now he couldn't remember what it was. His mind was half-drifting in sleep even now. The Hokage looked down, exasperation on his face, hands on his hips. It's over. Yeah? You hear the result? Nah, hands still on his hips, Naruto sighed. The moon had risen quite high in the sky. The last quarter looked down on them from its perch in the darkness. Not even interested? Naruto asked, almost sulking. Shikamaru snorted with laughter and shook his head from side to side. Why not? I heard up to Kuratsuchi's speech, he replied and yawned. After wiping away the tears that had welled up in the corners of his eyes, he offered his unconvinced friend some additional words of explanation. It was obvious that we won the minute she accepted the proposal from you and Lord Ikkyu. So that's why you were sleeping out here? Yeah. Sounds about right for you. Naruto laughed. Shikamaru? Yeah. Thanks, he said, a curious look on his face. I was able to get this far because you were right there with me the whole time. I would have given up ages ago without you. Liar. Shikamaru snorted. You would never have given up, with or without me. The words give up weren't actually in Naruto's vocabulary. I'm telling ya, I wouldn't have known what to do without you. You always shine a light on the path I'm supposed to follow. His friend held out a hand. Keep being there for me. Shikamaru grabbed the offered hand, and a powerful force pulled him to his feet. Naruto. Shikamaru, Kuratsuchi called out, approaching them with her aide in tow. Coming to a stop in front of Naruto, the Tsuchikage smiled gently. I see how far you are willing to go. And I get it. I wronged you. I'm sorry. I just apologized to Chojuro too. A smile spreading from ear to ear, Naruto shook his head. You were in a tough spot because of that daimyo, yeah? Don't worry about it. I appreciate you saying that. She bowed her head slightly. Let's keep things moving forward, Kuratsuchi. Naruto stretched out a hand, and the Tsuchikage gently accepted it with her own. Hands clasped, they smiled at each other for a moment before Kuratsuchi pulled hers away and turned her back to them. Oh, right. Shikamaru? She looked at him over her shoulder. Be good to Tamari. I know. The corners of her mouth curled upward, and then Kuratsuchi left them alone again. It's over, huh? Shikamaru took a cigarette out of his pocket and put it to his lips. Naruto frowned. You gotta quit smoking already. I'll think about it, he said and lit the cigarette. It tasted better than any cigarette in recent memory. The smoke drifted around him, and the visceral feeling of their victory rose up inside of him. Should we get back to the village? Naruto's shoulders dropped. We've got a mountain of work to do. That's a good thing, though, Shikamaru replied. A vision of the piles of papers popped up in the back of his mind. Instantly, his spirits plummeted. He had no time to delight in their victory. Thank you so much, the daimyo said and bowed his head deeply, so deeply. Sitting in a chair behind Naruto, who sat across from the daimyo, Shikamaru felt a slight smile playing on his lips. Despite his long journey to Konoha and having arrived only the day before, the daimyo of the Land of Flowers didn't seem the least bit tired. He was young, the same age as Shikadai. It turned out that he had only become daimyo 6 months earlier after his father's sudden passing. Abruptly thrust into the limelight, he had put body and soul into the unfamiliar work when the invasion of the Land of Earth had come like a bolt from the blue. My country is truly small. If this had escalated to war, I don't know what would have happened to my people. The citizens of the territory ceded to the Land of Earth were also quite moved by the goodwill of Lord Ikkyu and agreed to the cession. The culture of the Land of Earth has always had strong roots there, so it seems that everyone is happy about this turn of events. Lord Ikkyu says it is all because you and your people worked so fervently on our behalf, Lord Hokage. I can never begin to thank you enough. The boy had not stopped bowing since setting foot into the room. Naruto scratched his head in embarrassment. Shikamaru was just plain glad that the people of the land to be ceded had agreed to the deal. And after being showered with criticism and complaint from every country at the Continental Summit, Danjo had taken well to the task and needs of the citizens in his new territory. The session had been a success. The young daimyo was remarkably soft-spoken, much more so than Shikadai and the other young ninja of Konoha. I realize this is rude, Shikamaru raised a hand, interrupting the conversation. What is it, Shikamaru? Naruto looked over his shoulder at him. And then, as if remembering something, he turned back to the daimyo of the Land of Flowers and leaned forward. The meeting of the 5 Kages, the Continental Summit. That whole chain of events wouldn't have become a reality without this guy. Believe it. Is that so? The daimyo of the Land of Flowers stood up. He bowed once to Naruto before going around the table in between them and walking over to Shikamaru's seat. Shikamaru reflexively recoiled from the gentle-mannered boy's passionate march. And your name? His voice broke shrilly over the last word in the sentence. Shikamaru, he replied slowly. Shikamaru, thanks to you, my country was saved. Thank you so very much. The boy bowed his head with enough force to headbutt the still-seated Shikamaru right in the nose. Shikamaru pulled his head back to avoid a direct collision. Eyes shining, the daimyo of the Land of Flowers took Shikamaru's hand in his own. I heard all about you from Lord Ikkyu in the Land of Fire. He said that you fought together with Lord Naruto, that you were the Hokage's sharp and capable advisor. The boy had made a stop in the Land of Fire before traveling on to Konohagakure. As soon as the Continental Summit had ended and war had been averted, this sedate, sober boy had announced to his retainers his intention to pay a visit to the Land of Fire and the village of Konoha. He insisted on the trip before any proper preparations could be completed. His visit to Konoha came 7 days after the Continental Summit. I truly wish to meet you and express my thanks. Vigorously shaking the hand he still held up and down, the young daimyo bowed his head several more times. Shikamaru stammered. What is it? Stars in his eyes, the boy pushed his face forward eagerly. There is something I very much wanted to ask you if I had the opportunity to meet you. Go ahead. Why didn't you speak at the Continental Summit? Why didn't you make a case for how irrational the Land of Earth was being to the daimyo of the world? Oh, is that it? The daimyo of the Land of Flowers released Shikamaru's hand and pointed at himself. What would the other nations think if a child with this sad little face pleaded his case in tears? The end result would have been the same had I voiced my complaints about the Land of Earth with a bold attitude and no tears. It's been 6 months since I became daimyo. The only remarkable result to come out of me speaking would have been the awkwardness of watching me flounder desperately. Ours is a small country. We don't have the necessary strength to defend ourselves. When I show weakness, that becomes the weakness of my own country. In which case, what should I do? I chose silence. As one of the countries directly involved, I said nothing and sat by quietly. By doing so, I was able to get through the summit without exposing any clumsy weakness. I decided to remain silent and leave the decision to the representatives of the world. So then naturally, I did discuss it. With the retainers close to me, but the final decision was mine. Precisely because his land was weak, he had decided to accept that weakness, acknowledge its reality, and work with that to the best of his abilities. The boy might have seemed out of his depth at first glance, but he had a solid core that would not break. Thank you so much for answering my impolite question. Shikamaru bowed his head. No. The daimyo of the Land of Flowers shook his head quickly from side to side. It is I who must thank you so very much. In the end, the boy bowed his head throughout the entire meeting, start to finish. Because he had left his official business undone, the daimyo of the Land of Flowers had decided to return home that very day. Naruto and Shikamaru went with him to the An main gates to see him off. Shikamaru spotted his own son among the Konoha ninja who were guarding the retainers of the Land of Flowers encamped around the daimyo's driver. While Naruto and the daimyo chatted happily, he slid over to Shikadai on quiet feet. Jocho, Inogen, you take the lead and keep an eye on the front. I'll go to the rear and watch the back, Shikadai was saying. The three young ninja were in serious discussion, their faces pushed together. Their Jonin supervisor Kazunetsuri Moegi watched over them from a step away. It appeared that the overall planning of the mission had been entrusted to Shikadai. Moegi noticed Shikamaru's stealthy approach. So we'll go along like, oh. Shikadai looked back to get approval from Moegi and cried out when he noticed Shikamaru. The Land of Flowers people were moving forward with preparations for departure, and they all turned their eyes in this direction at the sound of this cry. What's going on? I could ask you the same thing, he said, grinning at the shocked look on his son's face. We'll be guarding them to the Land of Flowers, Moegi answered on Shikadai's behalf. Guarding a daimyo was an important mission. Unless the village saw your team as competent and capable, you wouldn't be given a mission like this in the first place. It was proof of just how hard Shikadai and his team had been working. As a father, he couldn't help but smile. Hey, Shikadai. He went to stand beside his son. We might have dodged a war, but the Land of Flowers has got the world's attention now. We can assume all kinds of creepers are going to come out of the woodwork. The risk of the daimyo being attacked isn't zero. Don't let your guard down. I know. Shikamaru had thought he would protest, but his son simply nodded in agreement. He was momentarily stunned at this docility, but made sure to maintain his composure so that no one would notice. He turned to Moegi. The will be accompanying you too, yeah? Like, of course. A black shadow danced down next to Moegi. It was a figure with a cat mask. Oh, so it's you, Hinoko. Duh. Like, don't call me by my name in front of everyone. Stop it, the monkey mask said, standing next to the cat. You're here too? Shikamaru asked. The daimyo of the Land of Flowers is one of the principal actors in the Continental Summit, Ro declared. It has been determined that 2 teams and 8 people shall attend to him at this time. My eyes practically rolling out of my head at the thought of having to listen to more low-quality puns on the road again, Hinoko grumbled. Well, don't say that. Shikamaru smiled at her. Other than those puns, Ro's a good ninja. Lord Shikamaru, the older man protested. What is the meaning of that? Other than those puns? Those puns themselves are the very essence of my being. No puns, no life. So then quit being a ninja. That's, exactly right. Gah. Who would punish a Hinoko cut him off? There's, a limit to how bad they can be. You weren't actually about to say punish a pun, were you? Shikamaru frowned doubtfully. It is strictly forbidden to ask, Lord Shikamaru. The monkey threw his head back in indignation. Moegi shrugged apologetically. Shikamaru popped his thumb up and pointed at the 2 umbu. However they look, these 2 have solid skills. What you mean, however we look? Keep an eye on my son. Shikamaru told Moegi, ignoring Hinoko. Understood. Moegi nodded her head slightly. So, back to the mission, Hinoko said, and she and Ro bent at the need for a jump. Shikamaru remembered there was something he had to tell the 2 of them before they disappeared. You both were a huge help again. Thanks. Do not hesitate to call upon us again in the future with any possible missions. We just, did what we had to. The monkey and the cat disappeared into thin air. Shikadai, he called out to his son, who was talking with his comrades. You don't know what's going to happen, but you know your own abilities. If you think this situation's too much for you, pull back. That's also a critical ninja skill. Shikamaru wasn't talking down to his son here. If the boy rushed things and tried to do more than his abilities would allow for, his comrades would get hurt. I know, Shikadai replied, pursing his lips. Yeah? Okay, good luck out there then. It's a drag, but I'll go. His son grinned at him, but that easy smile told Shikamaru that Shikadai said the word drag in full understanding of what Shikamaru had told him the other day. I'll be back in 2 or 3 days. Try not to fight with Mom while I'm gone. Shut up, you. Grinning, Shikamaru waved a hand at his son and then returned to Naruto and the daimyo. Everyone who passed Shikamaru on the road stared at him. This is embarrassing. Red-faced, he hurried home. He had never once before walked along this street carrying something so over the top. As much as he tried, he couldn't ignore all the looks he was getting. But he had chosen this, so he couldn't complain. Even so, this was a bit much. If he'd just bought the flowers at Ino's shop that time, it wouldn't have come to this, which reminded him what had happened to those flowers. He figured Ino had probably sold them to someone else, but either way, he had done wrong by Ino. He'd have to apologize to her. That damned Naruto, he cursed, as he hid his face in the burden that filled his arms too full. In that case, take home all the yellow ones. It was only because of how kind-hearted he was. Shikamaru knew that. Naruto hadn't meant anything bad. He really did know that. But he was so embarrassed at the moment, he could die. His house came into view at last and his pace quickened. Just a little farther. He opened the front door and almost tumbled inside the house. "You're home." Temari came down the hallway to greet him, and her eyes grew wide when she saw him. "What is all this about?" "Oh, Still standing in the entryway, he looked away from her. We sort of ended up helping the Land of Flowers a little, and so as thanks, the daimyo gave us a whole bunch of flowers. There were loads and loads, so I took a few." "Only the yellow ones?" She looked at him doubtfully. Shikamaru's arms were so full of yellow flowers, he could barely hold onto them all. And among the many different varieties, there also happened to be a certain flower that bloomed only in Shimegakure. "You told me to make up for the anniversary thing, didn't you?" Temari stared at him with serious eyes. He held his breath, held the flowers, wondering if he'd offended her. Did she hate the idea of him making it up to her with second-hand flowers? "Shikamaru." "Why, yes." Sensing an ominous aura, he waited for Temari to continue. "Are you happy right now?" He didn't really understand the question. He'd been utterly certain she would tear him to pieces, so this unexpected turn threw him for a loop. "What do you think about life with us?" she pressed. And now he realized what Temari was actually getting at. He laughed without meaning to. Temari furrowed her brow angrily, her lips drawn tight. "What do you think, looking at all this?" Still smiling, he held the flowers in his arms up toward her. "Don't answer a question with a question." His wife glared at him. "Thank you for everything." "Oh." For a moment, a gentle light shined in her eyes. She shook her head. Her hair, the same color as the flowers in full bloom, swung back and forth, and when she lifted her face again, her eyes had gone hard once again. "Shikamaru, before you went to the Land of Iron, you left your shirt lying on the floor in your room. By the time I noticed it, it was about to stand up and walk away. I'm always telling you to put your laundry in the basket. How many times do I have to say it before you remember?" Sorry." A cold sweat sprang up on his forehead. What? Could you do something with these flowers?" "Here." Temari opened her arms and leaned forward. He handed over all the yellow blossoms. "I'm sorry." He bowed his head neatly to his wife. "Honestly." With a heavy sigh, Temari turned around and started to walk toward the kitchen. But she stopped after a few steps. Her back still turned to him, she said, "Thanks." "Sure thing," he replied. His wife moved on brisk feet and disappeared into the kitchen. Shikamaru took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. He sat on the step up into the house and pulled his shoes off. He had to remember to put his laundry in the laundry basket. Family was such a drag. But it's not too shabby. The life Shikamaru wanted to protect was right here in front of him. End of Shikamaru Shinden, A Cloud Dancing in Forlorn Falling Petals. Thank you for listening. Remember to like and subscribe for lots more.